Hello and welcome to a Soul Wisdom Exchange. I'm Regina Curtis. I'm the creator of At Matri, and I am a Soul Wisdom mentor, an intuitive artist, and an art channel. And I have this amazing network of people that really are in the world doing soul wisdom exploration and helping to guide and support others along their journey as well. And today I have Jabeen with me. She's joining in from Pakistan. So it's late there. Jabeen, thank you for being here so late with the Wishing Well. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Jabeen, and then I'm going to have her introduce herself as well. So Jabeen is an artist, writer, intuitive creative healer, and a creative mentor. She's worked in many different creative fields, from fashion to design to content strategy, and started her own venture, the Wishing Well Company, in 2019, through which she helps people balance their emotional and spiritual health through creative healing and also mentors them to kickstart their creative pursuits. Beautiful work. She believes in slow, conscious living and making the healing benefits of creativity accessible to the masses. I love it so much, Jabeen. Thank you for being here. Welcome. How are you today?
I am good and I'm so excited and thank you so much for having me.
Oh my goodness. Yes, thank you for being here. I know I gave a little intro there of you, but is there anything else that you want to share about just who you are and what your process is before we start digging into soul wisdom?
So yeah, so the work that I do is kind of expressive art. So it's like
Mhm.
expressive, intuitive art.
Nice.
And so I've always had like challenges with like explaining people, like because people are always like, um, your proportions are incorrect and uh, like
Uh-huh.
what are you making, like this is so creepy, like why don't you make pretty things, why don't you make beautiful things, why don't you make pretty abstracts and landscapes. So
Yeah, that's
so it's
a great question. I love that because not all art is pretty, right? Like, and I love the way that you talk about it being expressive because your work is very expressive. And it definitely conveys emotion and it conveys like a whole experience rather than just a copy of something or a snapshot of something. So I really love that the way that that you express through your art.
yeah, so I couldn't understand these things before, but when I ventured into the world of spirituality,
Uh-huh.
and I studied like shadow work and all of that, like the dark parts and how important they are.
Yeah.
That's when I it started making sense why I made these things and like what's their importance and benefit to people. So that's when I started calling myself like really confidently, like I'm an expressive artist, I'm an intuitive artist,
Yes.
I paint intuitively, I don't need to look at references or proportions and the rules of
Mhm.
art. So
I
yeah.
love that. Yeah. That really that is the embodiment of soul wisdom right there. Like that is exactly what it is using your authentic ways of knowing and being. So what you just described right there is like my definition for soul wisdom. You receive intuitively, you express through you create expressively. That is like that's the soul wisdom cycle right there in action. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that example. Um, I also really love the exploration of language and the language that we use to describe or to explore different languages, right? Different ways of expressing, different ways of knowing. And when I was trained as an artist too, like I went through art school, I went to college for this. I was trained as an art teacher. And so as an art teacher, I'm trained to train other people in a similar way, right? And um that is a fine line to dance on because there's the technical skill of what it takes in order to understand how to replicate something. But then there's this whole other part of it that is very subjective, and that is the emotional part. That is the expression that happens through art, and you can't really teach that. That's something that has to come from within. So your journey that you're talking about is really coming into terms with that. And I think every artist in some way has to have that journey for themselves.
Yeah, and I believe that artists do have that intuition in them.
Mm-hmm.
All of them do, and all the masters and all the artists before, they have had that. And
Mm-hmm.
if you've read Julia Cameron's work, The Artist's Way,
Yes, I
she,
have.
yeah, she and there are a lot of other artists that they link spirituality with creativity.
Uh-huh.
It's it's there, but it's not really talked about.
Yeah.
Definitely not in the academic world. Definitely not, because
Mm-hmm.
that's gonna ruin everything, right?
Then you look at a lot of the artists who are like so well known, right? Like for instance, like Munch's painting the Scream, right? Like that's a very expressive artwork. And if you look at it, is it technically correct? As in, like, is this an exact replica of what it would look like for somebody standing there going like this? No, of course not. But what makes it so expressive, what makes you really understand the feeling, the emotion, the experience that this figure is having, is exactly because of the ways that it's distorted and the ways that it is so expressive, rather than the ways that it is technically correct as far as artistic skill goes, right?
Yeah, and the expressionist movement, that's what really, really inspired me always.
Mm-hmm.
And it really helped me. So, artists like Edward and Van Gogh, they really, really inspired me, like the colors and how they interpreted things in their own unique way.
Yes.
So they were using their intuition to do that. And
I love it. Hi, Hollis.
I was just on her podcast a few weeks
Oh,
ago.
were you? Excellent. I need to listen to it. I love it. I love
Yeah.
how interconnected we all are.
Yes, and so yeah, and so I started looking at so what has always really helped me is being inspired, and so I love now inspiring other people.
Yes.
So I would, and of course these artists aren't alive anymore. So I started looking at the artists that are still alive now, that are still following that,
Yeah.
carrying that, expressive way of painting and creating art. So I started, and when you have that intention, the things start appearing in front of you. So I started discovering so many amazing expressive artists,
Mhm.
and so I started recreating their work, because so I actually studied fashion.
Okay.
And so yeah, so my teacher taught us to use watercolors in like really fine, proper way, like painting dresses and all of that. So it was fun, but then it started getting really boring because my
Mhm.
hand was naturally like, that's how I paint, like really
Yeah.
rough. So I gravitated towards acrylics and
Uh-huh.
crayons and pastels, markers, stuff like that.
Things that you can be more free with, which
Yeah.
is really interesting, because for me, I studied surface pattern design for a bit in college before I went into art education. And it was so very structured. Like, you had to be so specific in how everything was lining up in order to be able to repeat the patterns. And I love patterns, but I also really love these
Hmm.
kind of more organic, natural ways. So, like, if you look at
Hmm.
the background that's around our
Yeah.
photos right now, like, that is my work. And it is
Yeah.
very kind of free and loose. And And I actually found that through watercolor because I found that it had a mind of its own, and it kind of would like,
Hmm.
you couldn't control it as easily as I could, or I couldn't control it as easily as I could, acrylics and markers and things like that. So I love it. You have a comment here from Asma. So proud of you, Jabeen. I love it.
I would actually love to show you. Maybe I can find my sketchbook.
Yes, please do.
After I oh gosh, I don't know. So I went back to watercolor after I discovered that that expressive, free,
Hmm.
childlike way of making art.
Yes.
I did go back to watercolor, and then I found that flow in watercolor. So making things like this, now you can see
Yeah.
here.
Here, put it a little bit closer. I love it. Yes.
So it was really lovely how I found that flow with the same medium that I felt so restricted with before.
That's such a beautiful analogy as well, too. Because I know it's hard to line up with the camera, right? Um,
Yeah, because
but,
it's mirrored.
but I think it is, right? A lot of times we find the restriction, or we find the resistance through a particular thing. And that resistance kind of pushes us off in a certain direction in order to go on a journey, right? Maybe go away from that particular point, whatever it was, where we found the resistance. Then we go on this journey, and a lot of times we find ourselves right back at the very place where we started, but
Yeah,
from a very different perspective. And
yeah,
it's interesting because I'm reflecting right now on multiple guests that I've had on this podcast that have had a similar kind of journey, where it's like you meet a point of resistance, you then kind of, that pushes you off, it propels your journey, you spiral around, you come back from a higher perspective, and then you see it in a very different way, and you can see then the gifts that that medium or that platform or that way of knowing or being, right, whatever it was, that access point that you pushed off from, you're seeing it from a very different perspective. And then you can meet it at this higher place and incorporate it in a very different way back
yeah.
in.
And um, when you say it like that, it just makes me think about like that's how healing works.
Yes. Yes.
You
Absolutely.
you come back to that same event or same pattern or your trauma or anything, and then you see it in a new
Yeah.
perspective, in a new light from a higher place. So it's
Absolutely.
just like that with art.
Yeah.
uh,
That's why I think, I love putting art and healing together in the same space, because art is, even though it can be very expressive, it can be very dark. You can use, dark colors. You really can express some very heavy emotions and some trauma through a medium that, even in those darker colors and even in those most expressive ways and movements, there still is infused this energy of curiosity and play and color, and all of these, I think of it kind of like, I think I said this recently, like a salve, right? Something that kind of encompasses that trauma and it moves it through more smoothly, because you have this kind of protective layer with it, and you can see it a little bit from a distance, so therefore you're not experiencing it in quite the same way.
yeah, and that is exactly how channeling works. It's like um, it's a regulation of your emotions.
Hmm.
So bringing what you're feeling wherever it's stuck in your body,
Hmm.
and then visually putting it on paper and then seeing it,
Yes.
and then seeing it outside of yourself,
Absolutely.
seeing it as something that's not you. It's a part of you, but it's not you.
Yeah.
So that's how healing works.
So it's a beautiful process, and even when it's not aesthetically pleasingly beautiful, it still is, beautiful from that sense of, okay, there's this wonder in it. And Hollis says, yes, creativity and play, love concept of art for healing. Absolutely. Because it's this place where I think a lot of times we think of healing as something that we have to be kind of isolated with, and it has to happen in these certain environments, right, where it's like you kind of go away and you go into this very deep place, whether it's a therapist's office or a hospital or some kind of like specific place for healing to occur. And you can actually do that same kind of work in a much more gentle way through the process of art and bringing it into nature and bringing it into community as well.
Absolutely. And um, what I've noticed lately, ever since I started going like all in into my art and
Mm-hmm.
removing uh, the limiting beliefs that I had, that my art is dark and it shouldn't be shared.
Mm-hmm.
So when I let go of that, and when I became fearless with my art, just the same thing you're talking about. It creates an effect of healing. And
Yeah.
just if people like they look at your Instagram, it speaks to a part of them, even if your art is horrific or whatever.
Right.
It speaks to them.
Whatever. If it doesn't speak, it speaks to them in one way or another, right? Like whether they receive it as horrific doesn't mean that it is. But yeah, you can receive
No,
it in lots of different ways.
someone something that's horrific for someone, it can be beautiful for someone
Exactly.
else who needs
Yeah.
it right now,
Yes.
right? So my horrific art is for people who need it. It heals
Yeah.
them. Just by looking at my Instagram, it heals them. and
Absolutely.
and the purpose is served. You don't need to be in um, like a traditional Zoom one-on-one coaching session. That's amazing. That's a lot more transformative.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But even just sharing, talking about your art, doing
Hmm.
podcasts, these are all ways of expressing yourself, and it heals people when they
Yes.
see someone else, you know, um, channeling their soul wisdom, speaking their language. It's healing for them.
It is. And that's exactly why I do this podcast, because
Hmm.
I really, along my personal journey, I've encountered so many different teachers, so many different what I would call soul, fellow soul wisdom travelers, people who are also out there exploring, trying to understand themselves, their ways of knowing and being, and also so many tools and modalities. And each of those things has been a reflection for me in some way. Each of those things has helped me learn about myself, whether it's through a resistance or through a synchronicity or through a curiosity. And so,
Hmm.
what this space, the reason why I've created this space and why I really love coming into it and engaging with people like yourself, is so that anyone can come into this space and they can explore and they can look around and see, oh, this really resonates for me. That really doesn't. And you know what? Both of those things can exist in one space, and that's okay. Just like we can all exist together in one space and be different, and that's okay, right? In fact,
Absolutely.
I think that's even better because then we can continue to learn from each other. We can continue to, give to each other, receive from each other, and even push each other in ways that are supportive and empowering to say, like, here I am, I'm here with you. I see this beautiful thing in you, and you can do it, right? That support system is also so, so important. Um, yeah.
Absolutely.
So I'd love to hear, I know you've talked a little bit about your artwork and how you express. I'd also love to hear about how you receive. So what are the ways that you receive your soul wisdom and then you express that to, it talks to and through you in your art and also in other ways in your life.
So for me, it has always had something to do with pain. So it could be emotional pain or
Mhm.
physical pain.
Okay.
And through my journey, I have learned that. And through this work, I've learned that pain is is also, it's not only bad, it's also good. So my journey started from me like getting diagnosed with a mental illness.
Okay.
And so it really came in the way of my confidence and going all in into my traditional art. So I pushed traditional art aside for the longest time. I was illustrating, I was designing, I was happy, but it wasn't that fulfilling for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know how I want to show you. I started keeping this. So I left my job one day totally abruptly, and um, I really felt like I want to do some. I want to go to different places, and I want to capture things, and
Mm-hmm.
I want to capture how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
And so I also started my art circles. Like I felt like, okay, if I'm feeling like this, if I'm feeling so isolated, if I'm feeling disconnected from myself and the world, then there must be other people like that. So we would
Absolutely.
sit at a park, and so this is way back, and they would be free. We would sit at a park and we would draw together. And then I started keeping this personal practice. So I started making like really
Mm-hmm.
dark things. I would write really dark poetry with it.
Yeah.
Um, so I didn't really share much on my Instagram. I used to have a blog then, because again it was so dark, and I said to myself, you know what, I don't have to share it, and
No, you don't. Yeah.
I don't have to look at references. So this was the start of it. I don't
Mm-hmm.
have to look at references. I don't have to do anything, and I don't even have to
I
use
love it.
colors.
Yeah.
I started with a charcoal pencil because
Okay.
it made me feel so connected to my body and my emotions. And I would just, because with a charcoal pencil, it's like, you can make whatever and it still looks so nice. I don't know how.
I
so
love it. I love it.
so yeah, so this sketchbook was filled with like really dark things, and even then when I would share them, people would be like, why do you make these dark things? Why are you so lost? And I would be like, fuck you. I love being lost.
I want to share with you also, like, I think that's beautiful. And I know you're talking about this being kind of like the beginning of your journey, right? But I think that also, actually, I know that also it's important to bring these practices in at different places along your journey as well. Like, even really recently, I started to, I changed my what I call devotional practices, daily practices. I just use the word devotional because that to me it's a more nourishing word. And sorry, there's a lot of noise outside, so hopefully it's not making my noise in my camera or in
Yeah.
my microphone bad. But anyway, I love that you started with using that charcoal pencil. For me, it's a Sharpie marker, and so oftentimes I'll do something with just a black Sharpie marker. I have tons of them here on my desk that I could pull out. And recently I started doing these line drawings, blind contour line drawings of myself. And
Hmm.
it was a very short practice where I would just, every day in the mirror, I would do one blind contour drawing. And then eventually I started adding in color to them and bringing them more to life. But I'm going to share one of these. And so they're very, you could look at this and say, oh, that's grotesque as well, right? But like I
Yeah.
love how they really are just very, each one is very different and each one is very emotional. And
Yeah, you captured your, emotional energy into them.
absolutely. Yeah. And this is something that I did very recently. And it was the same thing. The reason I wanted to share this is because when you were talking about how you gave yourself permission to not share it, to not get really elaborate with the materials, to not worry about that, and to do it for you in this private way, which now I share these, but I didn't at first. When I first started them, I didn't share them with anybody. I just did them for myself. I used these minimal, materials. And it was several weeks went by before I ever started even going back and adding color into them. Because at that point, I sat with it for a long enough time that it really had started to kind of like move me through those emotions that I was feeling and get to the point where I could even think about bringing color into them.
Yeah, and also, there's something about these like small A4 sized sketchbooks.
Yes.
It just having a sketchbook, it's like, it's hidden, it's inside.
Yeah,
No one's gonna look. And just small, you can waste paper.
it's
No one
accessible.
has to see it.
No,
You can like tear off the page and throw it in the dustbin if it's bad or whatever. Because I paint these like canvases that you see, and this is a
uh-huh.
small one. I paint really large ones. So it takes a lot of courage and bravery to do this because it's
Yes.
there. People are gonna look at it.
It's much harder to tuck that away somewhere in a drawer, right?
E- Even though this is also intuitive, I did not look at any references or anything, but
Yeah.
it's still courage. There's color, to balance colors. There is
Right.
some rules of art involved in there, but to get this bravery, you have to start from here, from your small sketchbook.
Absolutely. Yes, I love that. So
Yeah.
that's so important too. And I just want to pause and reflect on that for a minute. So what you're saying is that when when you're working in these big ways, and I'm using that metaphorically, symbolically, right? Even though we're talking about it in a physical sense as well. But to get to a place where you're ready to work on this big canvas or to work on this big stage or to work in these more open, visible, vulnerable places, it starts in those smaller personal, places. And it starts with these devotional ways, you showing up for yourself. And as you show up regularly for yourself, then you get that courage, you get that clarity, you get that confidence to really expand out and start sharing it in a more public and visible way, whether that's on a canvas, whether that is, and that, that's relative for each person too, because what may feel really big and scary and vulnerable at one point is just showing it to one other person, right? And then maybe as you come back around that spiral that we talked to, maybe the next time you come around, it's actually sharing it on a podcast. And then maybe it's sharing it in a gallery, or maybe it's sharing it on TV, or, something that you keep coming back into that space and it keeps growing and expanding. And as you evolve, it evolves with you.
Yeah, and it's a slow process. So that is why I focus on slow living,
Yes.
taking things one platform, one medium at a time. Like
Beautiful.
like people like I also used to teach art. I might start teaching again. So people are so quick to jump to paints, and I'm like, hold your horses there. You have to start.
Start
You
with
have to,
pencil. Start with
yeah.
pen.
And it's so important to trust your hands and have that trust because this is what I'm learning this entire year. And also, we had that private conversation earlier when we met the
Yeah.
first time about intuition and doing readings and stuff.
Hmm.
So this entire year, what I've learned is like trust is so important, and intuition and channeling and receiving. It's not something like otherworldly, like a monster does not take over you.
Yes.
It,
I
it's
love that. It is so true. It is very personal. It's very safe and very familiar, right? A monster does not take over you.
it's
I love that. Thank you for saying that.
it's just you. It's just you being yourself,
Yes.
and you just have to have that trust to receive.
Mhm.
I'm working with a mentor, and she taught me this thing. Like, Jabeen, just say, I'm open to receiving from
Yes.
my intuition. And this is what when I guide my clients in my sessions. That's what I start with. Like, trust yourself, trust your hands, trust
Yes.
your intuition. That's all you need. And whatever comes, whatever happens then, it's just things just unfold, and things just happen, and it's just you. Like like even as I'm speaking on this podcast, like how we're talking, we didn't decide this. It's just,
Right.
it's unfolding, and
Mhm.
it's the same case with your intuitive art that you make, whether it's personal, or you're painting something big, or you're showing it publicly, or whatever.
Mhm.
So receiving is, it's not like, it's so familiar, like you said,
Yeah.
and it just comes to you. Like, I want to show you something like so profound that happened.
Yeah. I'd love it.
So I've been doing these readings. Like, I don't know if you can
Yeah,
see,
I know it's hard to see on the video. That's okay. Yes.
and also the mirror thing.
I know.
Like I saw this image, um,
I love
for
that.
this girl, and what happened was, I just saw it in my mind, because I just see things in my mind. It's not forced. It's not something
Mhm.
forced. I just see things, and I shared it with her, and I just wrote whatever I felt like this meant. Like, I don't have a certificate in oracle card reading or anything. I just wrote what I felt,
Mhm.
and I told her to meditate on this because she wasn't clear on what I was saying. So I was like, you can use your own intuition and you can
Yeah.
meditate on this. And she did, and what she saw was a continuation of this drawing, like what happened after, like what would happen after.
Afterward. Mhm.
So this is just exactly what I was talking about earlier, like not being in a Zoom session, just sharing your work, and it inspires people. So she saw, like, she so when she meditated, she saw this herself on the stairs, and she was going, and then she saw her higher self speaking to her, and it was so amazing. And then she pulled an oracle card for herself, and the image on the oracle card was very, very
Very
similar to this.
similar. Yeah.
Very similar.
That happens so frequently too with
Yeah.
I have a group called Soul Wisdom Fluency where we come together in community, but we also work one on one. So I work one on one as a Soul Wisdom mentor, and I do what I call an oracle art. Excuse me, a soul wisdom compass, which is an art oracle message, basically. So the
Hmm.
beginning of our work together, I create this compass, and then the person meditates with that. They work with it all throughout the time we're working together. It becomes a physical tool that they have that they can use, that's an access point. And so what I see what you're doing there, it's this, you're creating an access point for that soul wisdom to come through. And
Yeah.
it's just like when you and I come together in conversation, that's an access point. When you sit in that art circle in the park that you were talking about, again, an access point. It's an opening into, the portal that
Hmm.
takes you wherever it is that your soul wisdom is going to travel with you. And
Exactly.
and so I love these ways that creativity, you can do that for yourself, like my clients, I teach workshops too that say, here's how you can do this yourself. And it's not that I'm actually teaching them how to do it, I'm giving them the structure in which they can use to support them in meeting that space where you've created that space for yourself. You've created that process for yourself. You create that process for your clients and the people you work with as well. And that can be very helpful because sometimes we know, like, I mean, I work with mentors too, right? Like every person that I know that is a spiritual guide, a healer, a intuitive, whatever you want to call it, right? If you're showing up and teaching in the world, you also are a learner and you're showing up
Yeah.
and you're receiving
Exactly.
in the world, because we need to do our own work too. And we need
Exactly.
to continue exploring so that we can find the gifts that we have and define and refine those gifts and share them so that we can help others find their own. And it's this beautiful cycle that continues. Um, So yeah, I love that example. I love those oracle messages that you're creating for people, and how you're guiding them to, sit with that yourself. And yes, there's a message that comes through, there's an image that comes through very similar as mine, where it's
Mhm.
like, here's a starting point. And I love that one that's stairs, right? Too, because it's like, that's exactly what it is. This is the first step, then you take another step,
Mhm.
and then you can come back into it later, and maybe you're on this step up here now, and you go off on a journey, and then you can come back in. It's like this ongoing relationship or conversation that continues on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So much fun,
And
um, and such a really accessible way for people to do that kind of work, right? um, One of the things that I'd love to talk with you about today while we're in this conversation is the word, or the term, art therapy, because I think what we are talking about in a lot of ways is very much a way to utilize art in your healing. But art therapy is something that I think a lot of people have a little bit of resistance to, or maybe see it as such a very specific thing that they think like, oh, I can't do this without having an art therapist, or so I just want to hear your thoughts on the terminology for art therapy and what that really is to you, how you experience it.
okay, so lately I decided that I'm not gonna call myself an art therapist anymore.
Hmm.
So I'm calling myself a creative healer now. And the reason is that people are so scared of the word therapy.
Yes.
Like, because people have had really bad experiences in therapy. And it's because sometimes talking um, isn't very gentle, like, sitting and talking. It's hard, especially when you're going through pain.
Hmm.
So I was having this conversation earlier in some other group about how when you're in pain or when you're going through difficult emotions, talking can be really difficult. Coaching someone can be really difficult.
Hmm.
Helping them to see a future, telling them, how we tell people like, oh, it's okay, it happens to everyone. This is not a very good way to work with someone
Well,
who's going through pain, because they need validation. They need,
yeah,
like,
it
people to feel
minimizes
like
that experience, right? It
exactly.
devalues that experience. Hmm.
So this is why art therapy or creative healing. It's so beneficial during that time, and because it helps you, sit with those feelings. Like I mentioned earlier, seeing them as outside of yourself,
Hmm.
and and finding compassion for yourself in that pain that you're feeling, and loving that pain. Like I
Hmm.
was talking about earlier, how I have learned to see that pain is good and bad, because now
Hmm.
when I sometimes when I'm receiving, my forehead hurts here, or sometimes my ears will hurt when I'm about to
Hmm.
hear something, or
Hmm.
my heart will hurt. So it's a good kind of hurt.
Yeah.
So it's truly amazing to witness people understanding themselves. Like, people, they come to their own conclusion. They change their own perspectives in art therapy or creative healing. They will say themselves like really beautiful realizations they would have, like, how just on Friday this client said herself, I didn't push her or anything. The art she made, her intuition spoke to her, and she said, I am. I never realized that I'm so whole,
Mm.
and I've been searching for parts of myself.
Hmm.
I've felt so scattered, but now I realize that I'm so whole.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and she was crying when I said it, and it was so beautiful to witness that transformation.
Hmm.
And And it's truly beautiful when a person they say it themselves. So in art therapy, this is what I love. It's not forced. I'm not going to force you to sit with me. And even in my sessions, I tell them it might be 45 minutes, it might be 75 minutes. So don't really know how it's gonna work. I don't really know what's gonna happen because
Right, because
even
you're
my
really working
sessions,
intuitively, right?
yeah,
And allowing them to as well. I love that. Um,
yes,
that's actually something that I've been, kind of grappling with in my own practice because I do work intuitively. And a lot of I'll say my peers in like the coaching space have these very structured programs of like, you're going through, you're learning this modality, you're doing this, you're learning that modality, and you're doing it in these ways, and there's a progression. And well, I like that. Like, I think it's very beneficial, and some people need that and they need to work in that way. The way that I work best is to just, we both show up. We have an intention that we are going to come together and allow for whatever it is that needs to come through in that moment for your highest and greatest good and my highest and greatest good, and not for us collectively. And then we explore and we allow it to come through and we allow it to happen using whatever comes through. And that really is what's true for me, and that is the way that I work best. And so I have this kind of like, that's where my own personal resistance is right now, as in the space of healing and coaching, because um that is what I know. That is how I know to best show up and find the truth, even though that's not necessarily what is considered norm. Like, this is what's normal, or
yeah,
this is what's accepted, right? And um, if you look at my astrological chart, my life path is the radical revolutionary. And I keep coming back into that. And like the work that you're doing, like, to me, that's the radical revolutionary, right? It's the same, very similar, of like showing up and just being completely authentic in, this is what I know, this is how I know it, and this is where it's showing me to go. And you can show up in your authentic way, and we can come together in that conversation, and we can work together to travel together, right? To explore together. And then we part ways and we come back together, and we part ways and come back together.
absolutely. And you need to meet the client where they are at right now,
Yes.
and not like like shoving your tools and your methods down their throat. Like they
Right.
don't need that right now, especially when someone's going through pain. And the thing is, with me, people come with like, I just need clarity. I just need more passion in my life. But as we do the exercises, oh my gosh, there's so
Yes.
much that they're carrying that they don't even know
Right.
from their childhood or from like so much.
Mm-hmm.
So it's never just, oh, I need some courage. Oh, I just need some clarity. It's just a small
I need some
thing.
courage, but
It's,
why do I need courage? Because I've learned my whole life that I'm not, ready, or enough,
yeah,
or I'm too much, or whatever it is. And those things
yeah.
unfold. Yeah,
And just
absolutely.
never allowing themselves to experiment,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Like when I tell them an exercise, like do this, they're like, how do I do it? What do I do? Like, I'm not, I have to remind them, this is not an art lesson. And
Right.
so I keep I tell them, okay, you can do this. I show them, but I'm like, this is not an art lesson. You have to draw what you saw. And I'm not gonna tell you how.
Or draw what
So
you felt, right? And
yes,
that is not something that we're really taught how to do, because we're not even really taught always how to access our own feelings or describe them, or even that it's okay to feel them. So then when we ask somebody to not only describe them but express them through another language, whether it's writing or drawing or even talking, right? Then that's where those triggers come in, and that's where people have a tendency to just shut down. So it's like finding the tools, finding the place, finding that access point that works for them, and then that's where you start. And that is why I think, like, when you work intuitively, you can find that spot. But when you have that structure, it calls in a different group of people, right? When you have that structure, then people meet you when that's when they can identify this is what I need, or maybe this is what I'm curious about. And so I'm going to go on that adventure. So that serves a whole nother
Hmm.
population. It serves a whole nother need. But it doesn't serve everyone necessarily.
Yeah, and everyone gets what they need. And um, also, what I've noticed, like, uh, really, really toxic in the coaching industry is like telling people like, uh, do this, do that, this is wrong, this is right, and
Mm-hmm.
especially people who have had like mother wounds or daddy issues, stuff like that. This is something that also happened with me when I was in a program. Like somewhere subconsciously, when we're working with a guide or a therapist, a facilitator, healer, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
when we have that issue from childhood, we start thinking that they are our mom and dad,
We give them
and we
that same kind of
yeah,
authority over us. Yeah.
and we like and we just turn our mind and our intuition off, and we're like, I'm just gonna do what this person is telling me because they know better, and
Mm-hmm.
then they're gonna help me make 5K, 10K months or whatever, and they're gonna do everything for me, and I don't have to do anything. So
Mm-hmm.
that's so wrong. And people do that, coaches do that, therapists do that. They tell people, oh, this is wrong, or they would laugh at the client, or really awful things that I hear all the time, and they've also happened with me. So I have like made it a part of my work. Like I always tell people, follow your intuition,
Mm-hmm.
listen to what you know. I'm not gonna tell you anything. Like just the other day, I told the client, like she literally saw like a meditation sequence when I was working with her, when she drew it, and I told her. In the beginning, she was like, I find it hard to meditate, and I find self care so hard. It seems like a chore. So I told her, like, you're literally, your intuition is telling you how you need to meditate, so you can
Yeah.
listen to that.
Yeah.
So listen to yourself, and I'm not going to tell you what to do. So, yeah, I don't know how I started saying this, but
Well, it's
so I really
important
wanted to
though.
put it
Yeah.
out there.
It's important though, also, I think that you had those experiences because by having those experiences, this is what I talk about a lot of having that resistance, right? We talked about this earlier. That resistance to a certain way of doing something has propelled you on your own path of saying, okay, I'm going to explore this in my own way, and then being able to come back in and do it in a very different way from a higher perspective. Um,
Hmm.
and that's, it's whether it's art, whether it's therapy, so to speak, whether it is exploration, whether it's soul wisdom, it is really being able to use those jumping off points, those access points, to go on your journey and come back in and gather it back in, and then say, okay, here's what I have, here's what I've learned, this is what I'm ready to leave behind, to set down, to not carry anymore, and this is what I've picked up along the way that I'm going to integrate, incorporate into where I'm going now. And here's some questions that I have of what I want to explore. So it's all this journey that we keep kind of coming back into, going on another journey, coming back home, going on another journey, coming back.
Yeah,
So,
coming
well,
back to like full circle.
exactly. Yeah. And we grow through it.
Yeah.
Um, well, Jabeen, this has been amazing. And I hope that we're going to continue talking because I love our conversations and explorations. They are a journey in and of themselves. So I do want to make sure, how can people contact you? We'll put the links in on Facebook and YouTube, and then I'll add them in as other platforms come available. But let us know what's the best way to connect with you.
So you can follow me on my Instagram. My handle is Jabeen Qadri. And you can also join my group. I love to have you in my group. We're a small community. My group is specifically for empaths and creatives. And I do a lot of like mini lives, little tips every other day. I share creative prompts, so it's really fun. If you
Yay.
wanna really share, you need that safe space to share your creativity, because I know sharing on Instagram and all of that can be difficult. So I
Mhm.
love that it's a small group and people feel safe to share. So
It's kind of like the journal, right? It's like the
yeah, it's like the
journal
sketchbook.
version.
Yeah.
Facebook's like the big canvas, but this group is like the small
Hmm.
journal that's a
Yeah.
little more intimate and private. I love it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's been a
Thank
joy
you.
talking with you. And thank you to everyone who was here live and commenting. Thank you to everyone who's here at any other point that you're engaging with this. It's exactly the right time and the right place and space. And we'll be back again with another Soul Wisdom exchange soon. So follow and like so that you can get the updates when we go live. All right. Thank you. Until next time. Bye.